everyone for coming for this session. I see a few familiar faces, so even more excited. My name is Nadhan. I'm the Chief Technology Strategist for the Central Region in Red Hat. Jeff, were you going to make an introduction?
Well, you're doing a good job, but I do have a little quote that somebody sent me that you speak 6 languages?
Yeah.
French, English, 4 different Indian dialects.
Yeah.
And you're here to speak to us today in a 7th language, which is?
The language of innovation. There you go. Johan, how much time do I have? I want to pace myself with all the technical glitches.
Yeah, let's do 5 minutes last, yes. So 20, what would be 45 minutes.
So give me like the 10, you'll
Yep.
be doing something from there.
Yeah, I'll give you
So-
a 10-minute time.
Okay, all right. So today I'm here to talk about accelerating collaboration to architect innovation. I know this is like an architecture conference, and when I looked at the different tracks when Yusuf reached out to me, this particular track, the technical innovation track, actually was of great interest to me for a reason. So this is my abstract, and what I'm talking about today is the need to architect, design, deploy, and monitor applications. That has really not gone away, despite all of the changes that we are going through, emerging paradigms, different way of thinking, and so on. What is different really is the speed at which we do it. So gone are those 6 month, 2-year cycles, and so on. We are talking weeks, days, minutes here. And we need to be able to be lockstep and ahead of the change that is happening all around us while we go through the phases. And open collaboration and purposeful innovation, it's no longer a choice. That's table stakes. In the keynote this morning talked about reaching out to the open source community for a reason, right? And if you look at the description of the technical innovation track, there is one sentence in there that stood out for me. So you talked about API management and innovation in general and so on, but the question that stood out, which is what my whole deck is based on, in my attempt to answer the question, is how do you architect, design, deploy, and monitor new applications in a way that deliver high-performing applications, but also support the high rate of change? So you will see what I did was I gave it some thought. So there were 4 words: architect, design, deploy, monitor. So when I thought about why we do all that, we go through that cycle, the continuous cycle. At the very center, first I placed the customer. Then I thought to myself, the type of world we live in today is really the mobile phone, the app. The app defines the brand for the enterprise. Software is the new brand for the enterprise. I gauge, Spirit Airlines that this previous speaker flew on. Despite their service, if the mobile app is actually doing the job for me, I might actually fly Spirit instead of any other airline. So the app is what I put at the center of this whole cycle. And then I thought about, so when you go through those phases, what can you do to expedite the cycle? So I came up with this. You collaborate to architect, you ideate to design. I was talking to Keith Nair after his session. Hardware uses design thinking. Ideation, they talked about ideas. The question was asked about where do you source ideas? Automate to deploy and prescribe to monitor. And I almost flipped the slide. And then I figured that's not quite adequate. You still need an ecosystem of innovation. So that's what we will talk about now. How do you, go through each one of those? Let's talk about collaborating to architect. What you're seeing here is, it's actually Legos. Bunch of Lego blocks and Lego labs, and this is what we had at so guilty as charged. Earlier this morning, Yusuf talked about Gartner being $10,000 and the content not as good. I actually spoke at Gartner, so pardon me. We were there at Gartner, and when I say we, Red Hat was there at the Gartner, and at the Red Hat booth, we had this Lego Labs. We call it Lego Labs. It's about building a city. So the visitors at the booth can come, and they have like a list of ideas that they can, on the back wall there, they are coming up with ideas, and they are adding their part. Someone actually wanted to add a porta potty. That's what they felt was the most essential in the city. I can understand why. So the point here is total strangers who have never really met each other, they come together to architect what the city could look like. That's what collaboration is about, and that is how innovation happens. So we built this city through continuous collaboration. In a lighter vein, I almost wanted that we build this city music going on in the background, while we were doing this. And then, when you look at TOGAF, the previous speaker, I'm TOGAF certified, and when you look at the architecture development method that TOGAF has, if you kind of take a different perspective on it, there is a reason why the arrows are bidirectional. And there is also an iteration that is going on. And the open group always emphasizes on the requirements management being at the center. You always go back and then revise the requirements. That's actually collaboration. If you think about it, it starts with the strategist, the business owner, the data architect. These are all roles that kind of correspond to each phase in that life cycle. And what they are doing is they're kind of adding their piece to the pie, their perspective. And when it comes back into the requirements and goes through that ideation, collaboration happens. So even though it is not called out, to me, this is a great way for multiple perspectives, whether you are the technologist, the data architect, the solution architect, deployment lead, yes, even project managers and program managers and the governance lead, they are all collaborating with a purpose, to architect. That's collaborate to architect. Let's move ahead and talk about ideate to design. So this is actually a couple of years old, but it makes a strong point. It's a Gartner article. By the way, this deck has got the links to all the articles that I have cited here. And what this is saying is, when you talk about digital transformation, about programs for enterprise transformation and so on, you actually have to think like a startup. You may not be a startup. I actually remember it was, I think, the CEO of General Mills. When he came on board, he actually said even large enterprises like General Mills can work like a startup. You can have a different way of looking at the same problem. And that is really what ideation is all about. And what this article is they're talking about is you really need to, you may not be a startup, but you need to think like a startup. What I'm leading up to is design thinking. Design thinking is not just for startup companies, it is really for global enterprises. You're really going through inspiration, ideation, and implementation and putting yourself in the shoes of the customer. That's really what you're doing. Think like the customer. This canvas, the business model canvas that is standard practice, typically is used when you're a startup company. You would look at who are the different customer segments, what are the relationships, what are the channels, what's the value proposition. I work for Red Hat. I never go walk into a customer site and talk about the products that we have. Instead, I like to talk about what's the value proposition, what can the customer do with the product, or what are the concepts that enable them to realize the outcome. I love the keynote today by E.G.Nadhan because yes, he referenced blockchain and AI and other technologies, but right away he started with the outcome, how they actually do facial recognition of cows or monitor what is fed to the shrimp and so on. And that's where he started, and then he led into sensors and AI and integration and so on. So that's the value proposition. You need to look at key activities and partners and the cost structure and revenue streams. The point here is that you could be a global enterprise embarking on a digital transformation program. You constantly need to think about who is your customer, who can be your customer, who are you talking to today, who should you be talking to tomorrow. So that's the business model canvas. But it doesn't stop there. And when it comes to ideate to collaborate, you can ideate to design. You can do that, but then at some point you actually have to sit across the table from the customer. Even if it is the customer could be a whole community, you kind of have to personify what they are looking for. So you start with, what is the customer's job? If why does the customer want your product and services? So you start thinking about what's a day in their life. It could be their personal life, it could be their work life. Then you think about what are their gains? What makes the customer successful? You could be an architect who takes great pride in whether the solution works, but does that make the customer successful? Ask yourself that question. Ask yourself, what keeps the customer awake at night? What is not working for them? and then come up with how can you create the gains, how can you relieve the pains. Those are the use cases that will resonate a whole lot more with the customer than what you want to sell. That's what ideate to design is about. Here is an example where we actually did this for one of our customers. And here's the interesting part. We knew the title, we don't know the person. Never met the guy. Actually, we didn't even know if it's a guy or a gal. But what we did was we looked at what the company does. What would we expect the SVP of enterprise architecture to do? What would typically their jobs be? And then we talked about, so it is continuous enablement, business functionality, agile, cost-effective business solutions, technology governance, the usual things that you hear. We had some context. We knew other folks in the enterprise, and we looked at their 10K documents and what their business goals are and so on, what their peers are doing. So we did gather facts. It was not totally just a guessing game. We talked about what makes this person successful. What does this person aspire to be? For example, we were doing this for the CIO of a retailer, and when I asked the question, I facilitate these sessions, and when I asked the question, the answer, I was expecting, maybe he or she wants to be like a CEO or a CFO or, a larger group and so on. Then what the answer I got back was, this person would want to be the CIO of a larger retailer. So this person may actually demonstrate success in 3 to 4 years and then switch jobs to a completely different company. So you kind of have to understand their gains. What are their MBOs? What gets them to Hawaii for the Chairman Circle Award or something? And then you think about what are their pains? What keeps them awake at night? You don't go and walk into the customer's office and ask, what keeps you awake at night? That's our job. That's your job before you meet with the customer. And then we came up with, how can we, so this is the Red Hat team, how can we create the gains for the customer? How can we relieve the pains? And then the use cases. And this is the language that we used to meet with the CIO. Here is the interesting thing. I was conducting an executive briefing for one of our customers. So the CIO is in the room and we've done this analysis. It was not this particular one, a different one. But I showed that to the CIO very first time. And I tell him, you know what? We actually met together and we thought about you. And we came up with this. What do you think? And I am on thin ice here. I don't know how the CIO is going to react. Maybe it's going to say, you guys don't get it. Maybe he walks out of the room. He said, you guys got it. And he actually appreciated the fact that we thought about his role and what makes him successful. That's design thinking. That's what ideate to design is about. So this is, you saw the thing about what we did with the Lego Labs. This is actually a little different. So this is a problem. We call it the marble track hack attack. And what's interesting is there again, you have to kind of figure out what is the best route for the ball to go from point A to point B, and there are some different constraints that you see here, like 6 drops, 4 towers, start at the cup, and so on. So there are rules of the game. And there is no one right answer, by the way. So what happens is every new person who comes there, they kind of contribute to that problem or solution. They come up with an idea. And then magic happens, and that is how, that is about collaborating for design. How do you solve a particular problem? So that is another example of how we can and should ideate for design. I'm reading this book by Professor Thomas Malone. It's about superminds. And what the concept of, so whenever I say supermind, it is all, I attribute and accredit Professor Malone with that. I highly recommend this book, by the way. What it is talking about is, usually we think about, many computers working together and maybe injecting a human or two in that to make sure they work together. This is completely flipped. Think about in a group of people working together, and let us introduce a sensor, an AI machine, a computer, to act like a human. And then let's think about how can that superhuman augment the intelligence of that group. That's what the book is about. So what this is saying, I've tried to capture the essence of what Professor Malone is conveying and pretty much written a thesis around it. So there are ways that we can augment our own individual intelligence. You read more, you go to college, you can do your homework and do exercises, whatever, there are ways to do that. What about the intelligence of a group? Think about it. Just because a group is only composed of multiple Albert Einsteins, that doesn't necessarily make that group the most intelligent. On the contrary, it may not be. You need different perspectives. How do you actually, each person in there may be intelligent in their own right, but what about the collective intelligence of the group? How do you do that? That's what Malone is talking about. And he makes some interesting points. He's saying, this is all based on research, these are all quotes from the book. And what Professor Malone is saying is, there is an interesting test called the reading the mind in the eyes test. And apparently this test is, he actually walks through what that test is. You look in a person in their eyes, and then you are able to say not exactly what they are thinking, but how they're feeling, what's their mindset. And that perceptiveness is a very strong catalyst for the group to be more collectively intelligent, because they get it. What is the conversation about, and so on. And then the other factor is degree to which the group members are participating. Now this is kind of, one fuels the other. But here is the killer data that came out. You increase the proportion of women in the group, the collective intelligence goes up. And this is also because apparently the reading the mind with the eyes test, women are just super good at it. They just kill it. So, that's a thumbs up to all the women in the room. And yesterday I was actually looking at a Forrester prediction for 2019. This just came out in the last week. One of the predictions around cybersecurity by Forrester, this is a valid link by the way, that they are predicting an increase in women CISOs, because that's the best way to kind of combat the different security violations that are happening, to think differently, right? 2017, only 13% of Fortune 500 had women CISOs. In 2019, they expect it to go to 20%. Still a long ways to go, but you kind of see the trend. So that is ideate to design. So what we talked about there was different ways that you can actually come together to collaborate and think about a problem and come up with different solutions and add multiple perspectives. That's really what ideate to design is about. When it comes to deploy, it's about automation. Now, let's go decades back. Let's think about DevOps. We talk about DevOps and so on, but if you take a step back, take software out and replace it with cars or manufacturing widgets in a factory model, even before all of us were born, I'm just going to say. And this is what happened decades back. The Industrial Revolution was about first standardizing, and then continuous delivery that came up with humans, and that's what got automated. You replace this with software, that is all that DevOps is. My point is, IT can actually, this is kind of the industrial revolution of software, where we are going from, instead of the throw over the wall approach from development to operations, we are actually now talking about striking a balance. There is tension between the developer who wants that agile environment, rapidly provisioned, sexy stuff, whereas operations is all about stability. So you have to strike that balance from multiple perspectives. So DevOps is, so on the one hand, it's kind of a way of life. You cannot go and buy like a pound of DevOps, but it is really how you, bake that into the processes, into the tools, the culture. So on the one hand, it is about business agility, agile development, and so on, but then you still want to keep the lights on, have a stable system. So, if you don't have a stable system, how can you develop? So that's kind of the balance that you have to strike when it comes to DevOps. So if you ask me this is actually another article I wrote about. The first one, I want to start at the bottom but then go to the top very quickly. The last thing I talk about here is the tooling. So before the tooling, it starts with the culture of the enterprise. You may have the tools, the DevOps tools, but just because you have the tools, don't think you have gone DevOps. Do you have the culture? Ask yourself that question. Do you have the mindset? Do the people have the mindset to adapt, to change, to adapt to try new things, fail fast? Failure is good. So that type of a mindset. the enthusiasm to share what you know. So don't write that new piece of code. I have this thing here, I can share that with you, that type of collaborative spirit. It is not about just your team, your project, your business unit, it's about the enterprise. So that's the art of collaboration. Once you have the culture, the mindset, and the art of collaboration, then the technology slowly starts to come in. Then the science of automation. So now you're actually, automating the right things the right way. And then the discipline. So you can have the tools and so on, but if you don't have the discipline to, check code in and test it before, checking it in and so on, the continuous integration is just yet another fancy two words. The passion for testing before you actually deliver the code to the customer. And the need for continuously delivering kind of goes back to that original cycle we saw and the system of continuous monitoring. Until all of these things are in place, who cares what tools you have? So that's kind of how I define the art. But tools do matter, don't get me wrong. You cannot just stop there. That's the whole idea of automation. But then you're using the technology with a purpose in the right environment. Automation, now I'm positive. If we were to, if I were to hand around a piece of paper and ask everyone to define what automation means to you, I guarantee there will be as many definitions as there are people in the room, possibly more. My point is that automation, we really have to think about automate to deploy is not just during the deploy phase. It starts all the way back at the business process. You can automate business process. There was talk about, federal regulations and so on in the previous speaker's session. These regulations change. You can have business rules. Code can be generated. You automate testing. Please do. That's the best way to, having the testing harness so that you can do regression testing and so on. You can automate code migration when you have to modernize. So when you have to go from a language of yesteryears to the next generation language, code migration. And also about moving code from between different environments. Absolutely. Provisioning environment. That's the developer's dream. Don't make me wait for weeks to get my next server instance. So automate provisioning, self-service. Capacity management. That is up and coming where it's okay to go to the cloud, but what if you have to do cloud bursting, and how do you know that you have there may be different events that are coming up, Thanksgiving, the retail shopping season, and so on. So how do you actually increase the capacity as needed, the elastic capacity management? There are leaders just for that now, being, so I used to work with one of the global retailers, the director of DevOps. I actually have a meeting with him a couple of months later, and now he's actually the director of capacity management. That's his job. Network configuration, so you absolutely need to, when you have retail outlets or Cleveland Clinic, there was a reference to that in the previous session. So there are, it's actually a network of different healthcare providers, doctors' offices, and so on. So you have these remote deployment of software. You have to manage the network configuration and so on. There are tools that actually do that for you. Patching. Why wouldn't you patch the operating system and the application software so that the next vulnerability you're ahead of the game? So that's software patching. So the whole point is that, yes, I said automate to deploy, but if you don't automate the other portions, as long as you're doing it right, then just automating to deploy, you're kind of short selling yourself. So collaborate to architect, ideate to design, automate to deploy, and now we come to monitor. And I'm talking about prescribing to monitor. What do I mean by that? So if you think about the word analytics, I'm sure large volumes of data and zeros and ones and then magic, all of those kind of things, we conjure up those pictures. Some of us, I do. But if we kind of start qualifying what analytics mean, let's start with, it's really about what happened, why did it happen, what is going to happen, and finally, the most important, what can we do about it? Think about it, if we cannot do anything about it, why bother? There is one advertisement on TV, I keep forgetting who that it doesn't matter, but there is this technician who comes to a house and he comes and tells the homeowner, oh, there is this problem here. So the homeowner obviously asks, so what can we do about it? And the technician says, I cannot help you there. All I do is report the problem. What good does that do? That's kind of like, what happened type of stuff. Descriptive analytics is kind of detecting what happened. Diagnostic analytics is to really think about and then determine why did it happen, root cause. Predictive analytics, which is the more commonly used term, is kind of predicting what is going to happen, but that's not enough. When you are monitoring, just predicting that that is when we are going to have the next system failure is not enough. That's table stakes. It's good you know it. Prescriptive analytics is actually taking remedial measures so that you don't even allow it to happen. That's monitoring. That is prescribed to monitor. That's a quote from the Gartner analyst that talks about analytics platform for IT operations. It is just going to keep going up. That's the whole point there. So how do you go about doing that? You discover, you continue to discover new risks. You have to build a catalog. You have to build, depending on the richness of your data, you are in a better position to predict what is likely to happen. It's kind of like, the industry that we can take a great cue from is actually the medical industry. So how the healthcare industry uses past cures for different ailments, what worked, what didn't, identifying, what could this particular ailment be, and what is the solution that is most likely to cure that illness, and so on. That's really a great example. So discovery, validation, and then resolution. Those are the different phases that we typically go through for prescriptive analytics. So let's go to movie land. Let's go to Hollywood. That's the Inception movie. If you have not watched the movie, it's about the character has this unique ability to penetrate people's minds and then predict what the criminal is going to do next. And FBI or some agency, government agency, kind of has him. He's hired to do the job for them. But the idea is, if you are able to penetrate the mind of the hacker to predict what he or she is going to do, and then you can take remedial measures, that's what prescriptive analytics is. So it's a movie analogy if it helps. So that is prescribed to monitor. So now, we talked about collaborating to architect, we talked about ideating to design thinking, we talked about automating the life cycle for deployment, and then we talked about how can you prescribe to monitor. So now I have gone through what we had in the original abstract in this session. If you look at the description for this session, how do you do that? But we are not done. Even if you do all that, that is not enough. You need an ecosystem of innovation, and you need an augmented ecosystem of innovation. Collective intelligence breeds innovation. So this is actually a Gartner analyst, E.G.Nadhan, who gave to me the simplest definition of AI. Ellen said, AI predicts faster, considers more, processes math. 3 distinct bullets. Now, if collective intelligence can be augmented with computers and collective intelligence breeds innovation, it kind of follows that if we grow the collective intelligence, it can scale the open innovation. That's the premise of what I'm going to share now, the ecosystem of innovation. Let's talk about open source. So from a Red Hat perspective, about 25 years, we are now in the very much in the open source community, providing enterprise-grade solutions and so on. But over 25 years, we have realized something. Open source, it is not just about software. Yes, you have open hardware and all of that too, I'm not denying that, but it's really about culture. The reason why open source works is because of that collaboration that I spoke about earlier. It is because of the transparency, the ability to see what is going on. These are the reasons why Cargill CTO in his keynote is saying they are contributing to open source. They're not in the world of, this is our IP. I'm not talking about the formula used by Pepsi or Coke. So there are clearly things that you will keep to yourself to differentiate yourself, right? But then the more you share that can be shared, the more you grow. That's the whole idea. Working together creates standardization. So this track has got a reference to APIs. If you are not standardizing how you work together, what can APIs do? So it's really about not the technology, it is about the content. It has to mean something to the recipient when you're actually reaching out with an API. Shared problems are solved faster. So that is what it is. It's a culture. If you think about the different technologies that have come up, whether it be cloud analytics, automation, platform as a service, it all originated in the open source community. So it is driven by passion. It is 24/7. It is not like there is a lab here and then it is here this quarter and gone next quarter. It is out there in the community. People they like listening to music. They like watching movies like Inception, and they also like to code. So that's the passion that is actually driving that in a continuous innovation. But it is a human ecosystem. It is the largest ecosystem. It is a software development ecosystem by passionate developers, scale fast. All of that is true. But to me, that is not enough. Because innovation must sustain at scale. Gartner predicts 100 billion connected things and 1 billion people by 2030. Data, devices, social media, applications. Right now, data is being generated. So when you are scaling up, when the digital world is all about scaling up, innovation must scale as well. Therefore, we need augmented open source. We need to augment the collective intelligence of open source. So now let's take a step back and think about what goes on in the open source community. You monitor projects. Million projects, by the way, not all of them see the light of day. I'm telling you. Then you identify what came out of that. You measure adoption. So Kubernetes, from a containers perspective, the reason why it is gaining ground is because of adoption. The more people use it, the more collaboration, the more innovation, and then there is continuity. If you modernize to something today and you don't even know if it is going to exist 5 years from now, why would you modernize to that? The best way to modernize is to get to something that has got a supportive ecosystem. You're safe. You are part of that ecosystem. You're kind of in that, you're joining the crowd, so to speak. You suggest intersections. This is where we can get to be creative. So how can we mirror, multiple, maybe get different projects to work together to, create bigger and better things? You inject catalysts. The idea of entrepreneurship within the enterprise or reaching out to the open source community from Cargill CTO's perspective is really about just that, injecting catalysts. But all of this is happening today as a human. So now, what you're seeing here for each activity, what is happening, the first column